Hello and welcome to the 160th of a second photography podcast. Street photography has been something that I have taken up while doing the podcast. I started out photography I didn't start out in photography. I started out with videography, making short films. Then I progressed to photography while keeping up with the videography, and I did portraits and headshots, and then I moved into fashion photography, and I still do portraits and headshots and fashion. But I started to do street photography. And really, it was about the time I was doing the podcast. And one of my very early episodes, which I'm currently revisiting my early episodes as we come to the end of the year, was with Spyros from streethunters.com. And we had a lovely chat about street photography. That's his main thing. He does street photography way better than I am, way better than I'll ever be. And we just had a lovely chat about street photography. So do sit back and do listen for the next 36 minutes to this episode playing again with Spyros about street photography. Thank you. Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the 160th of a second podcast. My name's Gareth and joining me today in this podcast is Spyros. And today we'll be discussing street photography. Spyros, would you just like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your photography?
Yes, hello Gareth. Thank you for having me here. I am Spyros Papaspiropoulos. I am a street photographer from Greece. Currently, I am based in Crete, in Rethymno. I'm originally from Athens, the capital of Greece. And I like shooting street photography. I've been doing it since 2011 or 2012. I can't be very sure when I started, but it was around then. And I really enjoy using flash with my street photography. That's one of my signatures, let's say. And I'm always very excited to be in the streets, doing street photography, trying out new things. So that's about it, really.
No, that was an excellent introduction. And just before we get into the podcast, I just want to say that neither myself or my guest are the complete authority in photography, and we never pretend to be. I do this as a hobby, and this podcast is really my opinions, my discussions and thoughts, and that of my guest. And please don't mistake our advice. Please don't mistake our discussions and advice to be the words of experts. We're just people giving our views. So, Spyros, I understand street photography as being going out onto the street and capturing unique moments or stories on the street. Am I right in that? What's street photography?
Well, street photography is many things. I won't get into my own personal opinion about it because I might upset some other listeners, because some people believe it's one thing, other people believe it's another thing, and there's usually a very heated discussion around what the definition of street photography is. But just to say something to answer the question, street photography is anything you shoot in the street and involves something that is either influenced by a human element or includes a human element. That's as general as I can do it, as I can say it.
I think that's a good definition. Would you say you have to have a person in street photography, or I'm going to change that to a life form, because you could do dog street photography. So would you say if you just took a picture of a building, even if you're on the street, that's architectural photography? Do you think it has to have a person in?
Personally, I think it has to have some sort of life form, yes. Either has to be a human being or a dog or anything else that adds the element of the unpredictability to a photograph. That's it, yes. So usually when there's a live being inside the photograph, something unpredictable is happening, something unique, something that will never happen again.
Is street photography about capturing a person's uniqueness, a person's story, an unusual set of events, or is there more to it?
It's definitely what you just mentioned, but I also think that street photography is about the expression of the street photographer and his view of the world. So, for example, when I started shooting street photography, the whole experience for me was about documenting the life around me. Whereas now, street photography for me is capturing expressions, capturing faces that I'll never see again, or trying to find juxtapositions, or trying to capture things that are totally crazy, surreal. So I'm not actually documenting the life around me in a way that a documentarist would anymore. That's what I did when I first started doing shooting street. Now I just try and capture weird photos, I would say. So I think that yes, street photography does include the things you mentioned before, but it also has to have the expression of the street photographer, the expression of the artist, filtering through, so the artist actually serves what he sees through his, oh God, let's do this again.
So we've talked about, you've given a sort of evolution of your street photography, but it'd be really good to understand where you started and why you started. Would you mind just telling me a bit about that?
Well, Gareth, one day I was not shooting street, and the next day all I wanted to do was shoot street. So it happened one day when I was looking through some of my photographs. I noticed that I was starting to shoot moments, happening in the street. And I saw those photos and I felt a strong attraction towards them. I liked them a lot. And I couldn't figure out what was it that I liked. So I started looking into similar stuff on the internet, and I found that this kind of photography is called street photography, etc., and it involves documenting the life around you, blah blah blah, what we talked about before. So I started getting more interested into it. That's how I started, basically. That's how I got into the whole concept of street photography. That's how I got interested in it.
I've recently started having a go at street photography, but for me, it's more of the challenge of taking good street photography images, because there are two elements in street photography as far as I see. Having the bravado to get the image and go up to someone and take their picture, and also getting a good picture that accurately represents what's happening at that time. And those two things together, I think, are quite difficult, and I think most people would worry about one more than the other. What do you think about that?
You're right. You're probably right, but it also depends on the type of mentality you have at the time you're shooting. There are times when I worry about one more than the other, and the other way around other days. And there are times when I don't worry about either. I just go nuts and I shoot, and I don't care what I'm doing. So I think it's all about the mentality, the frame of mind you're in when you're doing street photography, and also the area in which you're doing street photography. Because when I was in Istanbul shooting street, and I noticed that people really didn't care being photographed, I felt so liberated. I could actually concentrate more on composition and story making in my photos than actually having to worry about what people would say if I jumped in front of them with a camera. But when I shoot here in Crete, kind of the opposite. Okay, Cretans don't complain or shout at you or anything like that, but they do look at you until you've got to the moment of, to take the photograph. They follow you with their eyes as if they know that you're going to take their photograph. That doesn't happen always, but I've felt it many times. So when I shoot here in Crete, I am more concerned about getting the nerve to take the photograph. Even if I've been shooting for so many years, that's a feeling that never goes away. It just gets a bit easier. You learn how to put it in the back of your head. It's always there. Whereas when you're in another area where things are much more relaxed concerning photography, you think of making a photo with story, making a photo with good composition. You kind of move the element of worrying about the people out of your system completely.
I was going to say, I think sadly in the UK where I live, people are very sensitive, and you get varying sensitivity. I think in a big city, people are a little bit more tolerant, but sort of in a town or out in the village, people are a bit more wary of you if you're going around with a camera. But I have noticed using a small camera or using the secret weapon of a smartphone, people are so used to seeing that and people getting their smartphone out that they don't really bat an eyelid. And it's quite liberating just to use your smartphone or a compact camera. Much better than just using a big DSLR or a big, what people view to be a professional camera. So in terms of kit, ironically, in most photography, bigger is better, but in street photography, definitely smaller, I find is much better. Speaking of that, what equipment do you use, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, first of all, I totally agree with smaller is better in street photography. Secondly, I use a Fuji X Pro 1 with the 18 lens, the prime lens, and I also use the Ricoh GR. So I have compact system, but that changes a bit when I use my flash with my X Pro, because my flash is quite big, and also I flash people, so I can't really be discreet when I'm using that combination. But when I'm using the Ricoh GR without flash, stealth mode, then people rarely ever notice. It's so quiet.
Interesting, I've got the Ricoh GR, and I find even with that, I get noticed. Recently in the UK, we had one of the hottest days in June for maybe 40, 45 years. And I went to my closest city, which is Milton Keynes, and they were having a celebration because it was 50 years old. And on the hottest day in June, of temperatures around 35 degrees, they had people there dressed up in historical outfits with wigs on and completely inappropriate for the temperature. And I just happened to have my Ricoh GR with me, and I got it out and I took a few, and I got low, and I got some really good ones of some ice cream vans. And no one really batted an eyelid, but they knew I was there. That was quite a good sort of tester into street photography, because people associate those sort of events with people taking pictures, and people don't mind. People would quite happily pose if I didn't know I was there. But your more everyday person who isn't expecting to be photographed and isn't at a sort of convention where there are lots of photographs would really struggle, I think, in the UK. So there are some strategies that I think you can use, and one is maybe taking the picture and going to them and telling them and explaining, I've took your picture because I think you look really different, or that sort of thing, or I hope you don't mind, I took your picture, or just running away. Those are some strategies I use, or just not being detected to begin with. But are there any strategies you use, or are you fully candid in your approach?
I am 99% candid, and if I'm detected, I just smile and say thank you. And if anyone wants further explanation, I explain. But usually, just a smile and a thank you is plenty. I just walk away afterwards, and no harm done. The best advice I could give anyone who's doing street photography when they're approaching someone is stay stealthy, and if they're caught, just smile and say thank you. That usually solves 90% of your problems, of your confrontation.
And what's the worst confrontation you've had, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I still remember that one. I've had one, which I remember really bad. I think I've had another two or three which have been mild. But my worst one, was one evening I was taking photographs using a really fast lens and high ISO. So I was shooting in the dark. I was taking portraits of people as they were relaxing, as they were sitting waiting at a bus stop, for example, in the night, stuff like that. There was this guy, and he was in his kiosk, because we've got many kiosks in Greece, and he had the door open on the side of his kiosk because it was summer, and he was sitting there with the palm of his hand in his forehead. He was thinking about something. I don't know if it was pleasant or not. It probably wasn't, because his reaction was crazy, and he was thinking about something. And his elbow was leaning on the little bench that he had inside the kiosk, and he was sitting on his chair, and it was a kind of a high chair, so he could reach, the hole where he serves people through his kiosk. So the door on the side was open, and I saw him, and the light inside was perfect, and his troubled expression was perfect. So I took a photograph, and then I was using the Sony NEX6, and that had a really loud shutter. Even for a mirrorless camera, it was loud. So in the middle of the night, it went clack, like that. So he turned, and as soon as he saw me, he went berserk. He went nuts. He came outside, he started yelling at me. He said that he was going to break my camera, he was going to break my head, or whatever. But he was much shorter than me, so I wasn't intimidated at all, but I was, just looking at him and trying to explain with a smile on my face always that I'm a street photographer and I do this. It's one of my hobbies. I'm not going to offend him in any way by taking this photograph or not. He said, you're going to show it everywhere on Facebook, etc., etc. I said, look, if you don't want me to publish it, I won't publish it. I respect that. Whenever someone sees me take their photo and they like it, if they tell me not to publish it, or if they tell me to delete it, I'll delete it, or I'll just not publish it. So he went on and on about smashing my camera, and I said, okay, look, if I delete it, will you relax? And he said, yeah, delete it now, let me see. So I showed him that I deleted it, and then he told me to F off and get away from him. So I just said, okay, man, I'm sorry I bothered you so much. I didn't mean to bother you so much, so I just left. So that was it. But I still remember that night. I don't know what was up with that guy. He probably had some issues at the moment, thinking of something that was unpleasant. And I took the photograph and that made him click.
Seems like you might have caught him premeditating something. And was it a good photo? I know you deleted it. Was it a good photo, though?
It was a good photo because it really showed his, all that feeling that he had, that worry. And you could see it in his body language. And the light was dramatic because everything was dark except for the light coming in through the kiosk. And the light wasn't very bright. It was just enough. And it looked as if he was in a darkness, and his outline was, being pronounced by the light inside. But you could also see his expressions because there was light all around the kiosk, in the inside cockpit of the kiosk, whatever it's called.
Yeah, I think you were very brave to delete it. I think most people say I think you were brave to take that photo in the first place, but I think you were brave to delete it because I'm not sure I would have deleted it. I'm not sure I would have given him that option, particularly if he was sort of abusive and confrontational to me. So I do think you were very brave there. So well done on that.
Thank you. But I really don't like being in confrontations. That's the thing. So I'd rather delete the photo than get into a confrontation of any kind, because I know that when you get into confrontations, the only outcome is a bad outcome, never a good outcome. If you don't, smooth it out and end it in a peaceful way. I prefer to smooth everything out and end it in a peaceful way, rather than start yelling or, get into an argument I'll regret.
Definitely. You said that you explained to him it was your hobby and it's something you do. Is it possible to make money out of street photography? Is there a market for it?
Well, I'm not really the person to ask about this. I do have some. I do teach some workshops of flash street photography every once in a while. If I have registrations, I do make some money, but it's just pocket money. It's nothing serious. It's not like I can make a living out of street photography. But there are street photographers out there that claim they make a living from street photography. I say claim because I don't know for sure. I know what they say. So they say they make a living. So that's why I use the word claim. So yeah, I'm sure there are ways to make money out of street photography, through workshops, through selling prints, maybe through writing a book, or doing a podcast like you, and having a sponsor for the podcast. I suppose you could make money using street photography as the theme, but not actually by doing street photography, if you know what I mean. It's not like you're a wedding photographer and you actually make money for taking wedding photos. You're actually doing photography and making money with street photography. With street photography, through teaching or writing something about it, stuff like that. Whereas other genres of photography, like sports photography or photojournalism, you actually make money from the actual act of photography.
I think that's a very good summary. I mean, you're basically saying you might get noticed for your street photography and you might be able to make a bit of income teaching and other things around the topic of street photography, but it's not those prints or selling those images that are going to make you money. And I suppose I just want to clarify, I don't make any money out of this podcast. It drains a bit of my money, if I'm honest, but I do it because I like doing it. And I'm sure that's the same with you and your street photography.
Yes. I I have this website called streethunters.net with Andrew Swigart from the USA and Digby Fulham from the UK. And that's our hobby. We don't make any money out of that. We've got some Google AdSense banners on, and that's it. And it just, you make enough money, you know, to pay for our hosting, pay for our firewall security system for the website, because we get attacked a lot. I don't know why. So basically, yeah, we're losing money rather than making money. But we're doing it because it's our hobby and we love it. And it's been going on since 2013. So it's now 4 years.
That's good. We've had a chat about equipment, and obviously I think smaller is better, and you could start doing street photography on your iPhone, or use any camera really, even film cameras. And we've talked about, you've given a great tip about guidance on how to approach people, do it candidly, and smile and say thank you at the end. And I don't think there could be any better tip than that, really. But let's talk about the best places to have a go at street photography. Does it have to be a city? I always imagine a bustling city where everyone's in a rush would be the best place for street photography. Where do you think the best place for street photography is?
I think the best places to shoot street to start off with is places where people are preoccupied. So that could be in a big city, or it could be in a smaller town, in a marketplace. It could be anywhere where there are many people and they are preoccupied with something other than themselves, so they don't notice you. Those are the best places I think you should start shooting street. So if you don't have the luxury of visiting a big city, or you don't live in a big city, but you want to do street photography, just like I am here in Rethymno. Rethymno is such a small town. It's a small beach town, and it's only full of people during the summer months. During the winter months, it's so empty. You can actually walk for an hour in the street and not see a single person. So you imagine when you're walking in the street in the winter and you see a single person and you want to take their photo, there's no possible way you can not be noticed, right? So the only thing to do then is to go to places that have people gather, such as markets or the basketball courts, you know, places where there are many people and they're talking to each other, or they're doing something, they're exchanging things or whatever, they're trading. So they don't have their minds focused on what's happening around them. And then you can sneak in and grab a few photos. But otherwise, if you're close to a big city, or you live in a big city, then you're very lucky. If you're close to a big city, it's always worth jumping on a train or a bus and visiting.
You know, I'd never thought about the idea of people being preoccupied and having other things on their mind, but it does make complete sense, because then you're right, they're not going to notice you. They're going to be doing what they should be doing, and you're going to be hopefully capturing a good image of them doing that. And that's going to make a really interesting image and picture. So yes, that is a really good idea. Well done.
Can I say something on that, something more?
Of course you can.
When people are preoccupied, they don't even notice the flash, even if it's in their face. It's amazing. I have made photographs of people, because sometimes I record my photography with a action cam just to study it later, or to use it to make a street hunt video for our YouTube channel. And I look at the footage unedited, and I flash people in their faces and they don't flinch. I mean, they don't notice a thing. It's amazing. And I put a big massive flash and it just goes wow, bam, in their faces. And they don't notice it because they're preoccupied. So being preoccupied is very important if you want to get away with street photography. Not for you, for the subject.
I think it sounds like it's almost essential, particularly if you're using flash. It does sound essential, because you don't want people to look up from what they're doing and stop and pull a silly smile because they know they're being photographed. That ruins it.
Yes, it does.
So in street photography, from what I've seen and what I've had a go at, there are several things. There's the story, there's the character, and there's the composition, and getting things in focus and not having blur, etc. And getting all those things right can be quite a challenge. And I can imagine getting a good street photography image would appeal to a photographer. They might look at that and think, oh, that's a good image. Look at that composition. Wow, that was challenging to get it just right. And they might appreciate it on a technical level. But how do people who aren't photographers appreciate street photography, if they even do?
I'll tell you. There are different types of street photography. a photographer can understand the challenges behind any photograph when they look at it. And why did I start with the types of street photography with my answer? Because there is street photography that's aggressive, using a flash, for example, like I do. There is street photography which is more towards the fine art end of the prism. So you get, a very nice building and a really little person walking in front of the building, and you've got that in black and white, and you get these lovely tones and really nice composition, etc. And there's stuff in between as well. So I've noticed that non-photographers enjoy looking at street photos that lean towards fine art photography because they enjoy looking at photos that are really nicely composed, really neat, really beautiful photographs. And fine art street photography photos tend to be beautiful, of course. But non-photographers do not understand and do not appreciate photographs that are made under pressure, photographs that are really difficult to make, that are very close. You get many people mixed up in weird combinations, or you get someone flashed and you get a nice crazy expression, which a photographer would understand how difficult it is to achieve. But stuff like that usually are not appreciated by non-photographers because they don't look at the photo and they understand the difficulties behind making it. They just look at the photo as an image. So non-photographers prefer nice, beautiful images than images that actually, that actually an outline of how a photograph has been made. Am I making myself clear, or am I just blabbering?
No, you're not rambling at all. I do understand. I understand completely what you're saying, and you've given a very good answer about how photographers and non-photographers will look at things differently, and how a photographer will look at things from a technical point of view as well as enjoying the image. A photographer's bound to look at it and think, oh yeah, that's not blurred, but he's captured the motion, the composition's really good, the angle's really good, there's some leading lines there, and they'll appreciate it on a technical level, whereas a non-photographer will just appreciate the image and won't necessarily understand the work or the challenges that went into getting that image. I think you summed it up very well. I went a couple of years ago to see Dennis Hopper's exhibition of photos in London. I can't remember where it was, which is terrible of me. And they were all black and white images, and they were very street photography-esque, but they were very sort of capturing the moment and very reportage in a way. And it's made me think about the links between street photography and journalism and news. So if there was a riot going on or some unrest, the images a street photographer would get would be very, very similar to the image a press photographer would get. And I do wonder, is there an overlap there between journalism, news and street photography?
Yeah, that line is kind of greyish, isn't it? I do think that if a street photographer with no photojournalistic background and no photojournalistic expectations jumped into a riot, for example, and took photos, they would take completely different photos than a street photographer that's actually worked as a photojournalist or has aspirations of being a photojournalist. Because the person who has a photojournalistic bug in him will go for the story. The person who has a pure street photographic heart, a pure street photographic approach, will not go for the story. They'll go for the weird expressions, like they will probably photograph someone being pushed and their facial expression showing agony while spit is drooling out of their mouth, stuff like that. And they'd be very close, but the journalist would photograph the event from further back so you could see why this was happening, who was doing this to him. He would give a much more deeper story and deeper explanation to the whole event. I think the street photographer would get closer and photograph little pieces of the whole puzzle, so to speak, just to satisfy his need to capture surreal and weird moments.
Sorry, I was going to say, we have an expression here in England, and maybe it's not that well known in England actually, pie in the face. And it means it's got to be obvious, like when someone, a clown or someone of that ilk, throws a pie in your face, you know it's happened. And I guess with journalism and news, when you see an image, it has to know, the viewer has to know what the image is about. So we're talking about a riot. Someone would have to look at that and say, oh, that's a riot. That is a riot. There's a riot going on. But in maybe a street photographer would take an image but see something else in the riot, or capture it from such a different angle that it might not be obvious that it's a riot.
Exactly, Gareth. Street photography isn't supposed, well, this is not a rule. Sorry, I don't want to make it sound like a rule. What I like in street photography, I'll rephrase it. What I prefer in street photography is looking at a photograph and not having a clue of where it has been shot, why it has been shot, for what reason. What I care about is to see a photo that's so crazy and wacky and surreal that will just make my jaw drop and I'll say, wow, how did he make this photograph? How did he find this moment? Whereas photojournalism, I don't expect something like that from photojournalism. What I expect from photojournalism is an explanation of the whole event through one photo. It's the definition of one photo is worth 1,000 words, photojournalism.
I think you're spot on there. We've talked about sort of an unpleasant situation you went through before. I walked past some really interesting characters once, and I sort of held my small camera up and did a quick take, and they shouted at me, "There's no photography here! It says no photography!" And I sort of went past and took a few more pictures to make it look like I was taking a picture of something else. Image was dreadful. They weren't even in the image. I think it was of the pavement. It was dreadful. But do you think street photography has a bad rep? Are sort of people's concerns about a stranger taking their picture valid, or are people just too uptight these days?
That depends on culture. I'll mention Istanbul again. When I was in Istanbul, we had a street photographer with us, Kerem Nasipoglu. He was a Turkish street photographer. And he told us that if we want to photograph children, we can photograph children without any issue. In the group, we were a German, an American, and a Greek, and the Turkish street photographer, Kerem. Me and Kerem, because I'm Greek, found that shooting photos of children was quite normal. The American and the German, especially the American, found it unbelievable that you could shoot the photo of a child, without asking for anyone's permission. Just go up and take the photograph in the street. So it's all a matter of culture. I think that Western culture has issues with stuff like that, whereas Eastern culture has other issues. For example, in the East, it's difficult to photograph ladies without getting into trouble. So I think it's all got to do with culture and what's accepted in the area that you're shooting.
Completely agree. I think it's something I would not do. Even if I saw a good image, I probably wouldn't take a picture of a child, just because it's so, people just interpret it the wrong way, and people will always jump to the wrong conclusion, and the hassle and the aggro wouldn't be worth it for me in the country I live in, sadly. And I imagine most people in the West would probably feel like that. And it's a shame. And we've had been a few stories in the news in the UK about tourists coming over and taking pictures, allegedly, of children, and people being outraged and sort of people forming around them. And actually, they weren't taking pictures of children. They were taking pictures of something that was behind the children. And people had just completely misread the situation and gone into a panic. And yeah, it is unfortunate, and that's the world we live in, and that I don't think our culture wants to be like that, but our culture is like that, sadly. One street photographer or one photographer can't really change that. And it's people's perception, right or wrong. They're going to perceive things in a certain way.
Yes, but I'd like to add something else. There are some street photographers that give street photography a bad name. And I'm going to call out all street photographers that shoot bums and boobs and use their cameras from a low angle to try and photograph female legs, and they call that street photography.
I didn't even realize that was a subgenre. I didn't even realize people did that.
Yes, I've seen many people in many communities post photos of, for example, the legs of a lady wearing a mini skirt and having a title like hot stuff or something. I don't think that's street photography for me. That's an insult to street photography. People like that give street photography a bad name. Street photography is not that. Street photography is art, as far as I'm concerned. It's very difficult to achieve the results that you want to achieve, and to have some sort of a reaction for your photo. But having a reaction like someone drooling at the legs, nicely shaped legs of a lady, I don't think that's street photography.
No, I quite agree. And I was quite shocked when you told me that. I can't believe that. What a bombshell. And that's where we're going to stop today, on that very unfortunate bombshell. So I'd like to thank Spyros for joining us today. You've been an excellent guest and you've been really informative, and you've given me a lot of ideas and a lot of things to think about. And I recommend anyone who is listening to this podcast to go over to Street Hunters and have a look at the content that you guys have got there, because it's really good stuff. And I just want to thank everyone for listening. And don't forget, you can follow this podcast on iTunes. We're now on iTunes, hooray. And you can follow us on Facebook. And don't forget to check on our other 3 episodes. So before we go, Spyros, is there anything you just want to say?
I'd like to say thank you very much, Gareth, for having me on the show. I had a really nice time. I enjoyed our conversation a lot. And I'll sign off by saying, stay sharp and keep shooting.
And that's an excellent motto. Thanks very much. And I'll see everyone later. Thank you.